So, welcome back, students. We'll be just continuing with the convenience type of sampling. So, as the word implies, is the convenience sampling. It's purely dependent upon the convenience of the investigator. Okay, here it is a good example. If the interviewer was to conduct a survey at a shopping center early in the morning on the given day, then the people that he or she would interview would be of a limited to those given there at that given time, and which would not represent the views of the other members of the society in such an area. If the survey was to be conducted different times of the day and the several times per week, then only that interview will be of a good sort. You will be getting a which will be of a good quality, and this type of sampling is most useful for the pilot testing. The next type, it is a we will just continue with the advantages. That is a selection of whichever individuals are the easiest to reach. So we are able to collect the data from the individuals which we easily which we have easily access, and it is done at the convenience of the researcher, and user result will be the easy the result which we are getting will be of a easy type. And the result and the major disadvantages of this type of sampling is that the the result may be contaminated, because it's purely dependent upon the researcher, how the person is. If a person is some sort of lazy people, then the type of data which he or she will be collecting will be contaminated. Okay, so the cluster sampling, it is the next type of sampling. We have seen the cluster sampling before also. Still we will just revise the cluster sampling once again. The cluster sampling is an example of the two-stage sampling. That is, the first stage, it is a sample of the area it is chosen, and the second stage, a sample of the respondents within those area is selected, isn't it? So we have seen the picture here. The sample is selected from a section wise grouping is done first, and from that we are just choosing a cluster. So it's called as a first stage. A sample of area is chosen, and then a sample of the respondents within those chosen area is selected. So there are the two stages in a cluster sampling. Then the population divided into cluster of the homogeneous unit, usually based on the geographical continuity. The sampling units are grouped rather than the individuals. So in this cluster sampling, we are just concentrating on the sampling units rather than the individuals present, isn't it? From here it's clear we are just choosing this cluster of houses rather than choosing a single house. That is importance of a cluster sampling. Then a sample of such clusters is then selected. All the units from the selected clusters are studied. So there are the benefits and we can call it the merits and the demerits of this cluster sampling. These are the merits, or the pros are the merits. These pros are the merits, and these are the negatives. Cons are the negatives. So the first positive aspect is that it saves time, and the second, it saves the money, and it should allow for the closer supervision in the field, and it requires the enumeration of a population. Whereas the demerits includes a larger sampling error might occur and typically requires a larger sample. So if you are just using this cluster sampling, then the sample must be of larger size. Okay, so next, what is the difference between the strata and the cluster? A strata and the cluster are, you might be familiar now. What is a strata and a cluster? Let's see what's strata and the cluster. Although the strata and the clusters are the both non-overlapping subunits of a population, they differ in several ways. Although we feel that the strata and the clusters are the same in a sampling, but both are different. Both are the non-overlapping units. Okay, all stratas are represented in a sample, but only a subset of the clusters are in a sample. And then within the stratified sampling, the best survey results occur when the elements within the strata are internally homogeneous. And however, with the cluster sampling, the best results occur when the elements within the clusters are internally heterogeneous. So if we say this, the cluster sampling is good in the sense that it is practically applicable in a heterogeneous population. We can just apply the cluster sampling, and if a population is a homogeneous, then the best sampling method, it is a strata sampling. Okay, so if a population is homogeneous, then you should use the strata sampling, and if a population is heterogeneous, you should use a cluster sampling. Then there is a multi-stage sampling. That is, this is a sampling procedure carried out in several stages. As the name implies, it is a multi-stage sampling, means it's carried out in several stages. At first, the units are sampled by some suitable methods like the simple random sampling. Then the sample of the second stage unit is selected from each of the selected first stage unit by some suitable methods, and this procedure is extended. And this method has advantages of being flexible. It is a multi-stage sampling. It is a complex form of cluster sampling in which two or more level of units are embedded one in the other. We are just using one or two sampling methods will be incorporated together for the multi-stage sampling. This technique is essentially the process of taking the random sample of proceeding the random samples. So we'll be using the one or two type of sampling method in multi-stage sampling. Then there is a judgment sampling. Is a common non-probability method, and the sample is selected based upon the judgment, that is an extension of the convenience sampling. It can be considered similar to that of the convenience sampling. So in convenience sampling, it is based upon the convenience of the investigator, and here also we are just taking the sample based upon the judgment of an investigator. When using this method, the researcher must be confident that the chosen sample is truly representative of an entire population. So it is purely dependent upon the will or the experience of the investigator. We are just judging the sample, and we are just selecting the sample, and it is purely dependent upon the decision of the investigator. Then there is a Cotter sampling. In Cotter sampling, it is a non-probability type of sampling method. The first identify the stratum and their proportion as they are represented in the population. And then the convenience or the judgment sampling is used to select the required number of subjects from each stratum. From in the Cotter sampling, we are just selecting the strata. Okay, based upon the certain opinion of the public. So Cotter sampling, in this method of sampling, it is adopted in making the surveys of a public opinion. We will be just taking a survey based upon the opinion, or to collect the opinion of the public, and only the definite quotas of the persons in different social classes, the different age groups, or the different regions, etc. are selected for the interview. And the convenience sample methods are not the representative, since they are biased and unsatisfactory. And this Cotter sampling is also some sort, we are just using the convenience, we are just using the convenience of the investigator, and then we are just giving the judgment sampling or convenience sampling. We are just using based upon the convenience of the investigator, and for that reason itself, it is not that much suitable for using the Cotter sampling. So once again, in Cotter sampling, we will be just making the survey of the public opinion first, and then we'll be identifying the certain groups or the strata for the collecting the information or for collecting the study data for the study. That means we will be using a convenience type or the judgment type of sampling. Okay, so it's intended to overcome the so quota sampling is intended to overcome the most obvious flaw of availability sampling, that the sample will just consist of whoever and whatever is available without any concern for its similarity to the population of interest. And the distinguishing feature of a quota sample is that the quotas are the set to ensure that the sample represents a certain characteristic in the proportion to their prevalence in a population. So in quota sampling, we are just taking the opinion of the public, and then we are just choosing the sampling groups based upon our decision. Okay, so for this also in quota sampling also there are the certain pros and the cons are there. That is the merits and demerits are also there. That is the negatives are the make more effort than the many, and they need trustworthy poll takers. That is, we need to trust the public votes. That's a negative aspect. And the positive is that although they don't know the odds, that experience shows it's typically pretty good. That is, we don't know the public, and we are just giving the public, we are just taking the opinion of the public, and that means it is not the investigator who is deciding the what type of sampling has to be made. Okay, then we are just based upon the opinion of the public, we are just dividing the population into different strata. Then there is a purposive sampling. In purposive sampling, each sample element is selected for the purpose, usually because of the unique position of the sample elements. The purposive sampling may involve studying the entire population of the some limited group or a subset of a population. Or the purposive sampling may be a key informant survey which targets the individuals who are particularly knowledgeable about the issues under investigation. That is, the researcher chooses a sample based on who they think would be the appropriate for the study. This is used primarily when there is a limited number of people that have the expertise in the area being researched. So based upon the purpose of the study, we are just choosing the sample. That's called as a purposive sampling. Then there is a systematic sampling that we have discussed. Then the last one, it is a snowball sampling. Is a special non-probability method used when the desired sample characteristic is rare. So if a desired sample it is of a rare type, then we use a snowball type of sampling, and it may be extremely difficult or the cost prohibitive to locate the respondents in these situations. And these techniques relies on the referrals from the initial subjects to generate the additional subjects, and in lower search cost. However, it introduces a bias because the technique itself reduces the likelihood that the samples will represent a good cross section from a population. So in this snowball type of sampling, we have to simply rely on the sampling method, and it is a non-probability type of method when the desired sample characteristic group is rare. For example, it can be used to sample the members of such groups such as the drug leaders, prostitutes, practicing criminals, etc. It is hard to reach these groups, or it is very difficult to identify such groups uh, from a population, but you can say that these members are there in the population. That's all in this video lecture. Thank you.